Hi, everyone. My name is Braco Pobric. I'm author of the book Habits and Happiness, positive psychology coach and life coach. And today I have such an honor, great guest. You guys are going to have so much fun. Today I have Dr. Karen Baruch Feldman. And Karen and I actually met last year at the IPAN. We both were presenting at the International Festival of Positive Education. And that's where we're discussing grit and her upcoming book. Karen is a clinical psychologist and certified school psychologist. Dr. Karen Baruch Feldman also maintains private practice. That's in New York, right? Scarsdale is New York.
Yes, that's
in New York. She works part-time as a school psychologist in Westchester, New York. She has worked, I believe, about 19 years, almost 20, right?
Yes,
in schools, providing like in-services, interactive workshops, and now just published her first book, The Grit Guide for Teens. Dr. Baruch Feldman received her undergrad from Barnard College of Columbia University and her doctorate in clinical child psychology and school psychology certificate from St. John's University. So Dr. Karen, welcome.
I'm so glad we're reconnecting. I really enjoyed our time talking at IPAN. So this is really nice for me.
So did I. That's awesome. You know, I gotta say, and again, we are just going really to talk. There is no special agenda and or send questions, if you will. And I just want to say for folks, I was really happy and honored that I actually received with a personal note, your script, your copy, draft of the book, and was really, really impressed for many different reasons. Usually, when we get the books from, PhDs, and please don't take this wrong, but usually sometimes they're hard to read. There are no exercises, there's no workbook, and we all need it, but sometimes it's hard to for regular folks on the street to take that knowledge and apply. And with your book, I was just so impressed that there is so much of research and yet so much of practical applications. So tell us a little bit about how did you start it? Obviously, you've been working on this for so many years, but what got you just to publish and work on book on subject of grit?
Well, first of all, thank you for that compliment. That's actually was my intention with the book, was to take all the latest research and to make it accessible. So that was really what I was thinking about when I was writing this book. So thank you for sharing that. In terms of how I came to this, actually, I was a little bit lucky in terms of how I got discovered for the book. I've been blogging about these topics, about habits, which I know you're an expert on, and willpower and self-control. I actually had the opportunity of studying with Walter Mischel when I was at Columbia and have been really sort of interested in self-control and just on a personal level and also in a clinical way. So personally, I've always been wondering, I know for myself, I've always been very gritty and having great self-control academically, but in terms of my wellness, not so much. So I started to read and learn everything there was out there, reading everything about habits and willpower and things like grit, and then applying it to myself. And at the same time, I was also really struck by my patients and the kids I see in school, that the ones that I find that are most successful, the ones that get better, are the ones that I feel can sort of be emotionally gritty, who are able to change their mindset, change their behavior, and have a more long-term focus. So I wanted to be able to share this information with not only the teens that I work with, but with teens wherever they may be.
Thanks. If you don't mind, and I know a lot of folks know about it, grit, we almost every day we see something, newspapers, the new books are coming up. If you don't mind, just give us a definition of grit. What's your definition? And so that folks can get a little bit better understanding, for some that don't really have that knowledge on grit.
Right. So my definition is based on Dr. Angela Duckworth's definition. She is the pioneer who has really put grit on the map. And she defines grit as having passion and perseverance for long-term goals. I've added also the word meaningful to that definition. So it's passion and perseverance for long-term and meaningful goals. And I know that also, even though that's not in Angela's original definition, I know that that's something she also believes in, and I've heard her speak about that. But what does that really mean? That's really connecting to something that's really important to you, being able to persist in that, and being able to be resilient and bounce back when you have challenges along the way. And that's what I do think is really, when you look at people who are successful, they have that quality.
Nice. I got to tell you, we didn't talk about this, so I'm hoping I'm not going to throw a little curve. But when we listened at Angela Duckworth and we went to that IPEN, it was really, really great. At the end, I actually stayed 2 more days. And one day I just stayed in hotel room and I was kind of like recording some lectures. And I was putting some thoughts on grit and this great, great idea. And I was thinking back then when I was a kid, when I was growing up. It's almost like, I was always, even when my son was growing up, the idea was for him just to have a good character, to be a good human being. That was really more important for me than anything else. And then at the end, I knew that he will succeed. I remember Angela Duckworth talked about that a little bit as well. And I think she mentioned something, actually it's funny, I have my notes from that IPEN. And I think she talked about how, a character is really not just a grit, which we know that. But how do you see that connection between, a good character, meaning that not just looking at all these virtues that we have with VI, but just simply having a good character? How do you connect these two?
I think that that's a really important point. And I think that that's what I really love about IPEN, in that IPEN is this double helix, in that in terms of, as I said, I have a privilege of working in schools. And I actually just gave a final review to my 5th graders on this topic. And what I really wanted them to understand is, for me, in terms of being successful, that yes, it's important to have talent and it's important to know reading and to have math and to have those skills. However, without character, those things are not important. And so it's that combination. And I do think that schools are in the position through positive education to start to teach those skills. And that's the approach that I take, that I think that character can be taught just like we teach these other academic skills. We can teach them down by breaking them down and then sort of teaching them how to have that mindset. How do you have behavior? And that's what I've been doing actually, at my school and with the teens, helping them develop grit goals, connecting to them, and then finding their passion and then helping them really accomplish their goals.
Nice, love it. Thanks for this. Usually it's not addressed. So I'm grateful the way you see it, because I think it's really important.
And in the work that I do in my school, and this, I guess, is a little bit beyond what I say in the book, but I also talk about the character strengths of kindness and empathy and problem solving and flexibility and grit and self-control. All those things taken together, I think, are the things that are really important. So when we put all those things together, because again, for me, without kindness and without empathy and without being flexible, then the rest of the stuff, yes, grit is important, but I always feel like it always starts and ends with a positive relationship. And it always should come from a kind place and a good place.
Love it. Love it. I don't think that people who not just study, but do research on grit and try to publish papers don't really explain it that well. I don't think they explained it the way you did it. So thank you. Thank you. How can we help, and you particularly work with the teens. And let us show your new book. My book didn't arrive yet. I have a script, but let me see the book. I want to see it.
Can you see it?
A little bit back. Awesome. So we see Great Guide for Teens. Very nice. Very nice. You got your copy. It will arrive in a few days.
Yes. Yours will arrive. Yes, hopefully this week.
Thank you. So how can we help teens develop really like the gritty mindset, as you called it?
Right. So I think the first thing is to help. I really believe this is also, I guess, something that I write about in my blogs and in the book is that we have to come from a place of yes. It has to be that we have passion, that we connect to something, that it's important to us. It's not from like a place of no. So sometimes I ask teens to sort of shake their head no and then shake their head yes. And you have different feelings that come up when you shake your head no versus
Hmm.
yes. And if we can find out why this is important to you, then it's going to be much easier than if you feel like, oh, I have to be gritty because, it's such a drag and it's annoying. And that's not the direction that I would recommend. It's so how do we do it from a positive, meaningful place? So that's always the first place is how to connect to the goal that you want to accomplish. How do you have that intrinsic motivation? And the other thing that I think that has really been sort of borne out in the research is having either both a growth mindset and having an optimistic mindset. And I think that the reason is that of course if you have a growth mindset, when you hit a challenge, which is part of anything that you do hard, you're going to hit a challenge. You have a mindset that your brain can grow. In contrast, if you have a fixed mindset, if you hit a challenge, you probably just say to yourself, you know what, this isn't for me, and you give up. And what we know is that people who are successful are the ones who stay with things and stick with things over time, which also sort of has to do with optimism. So, having an optimistic mindset, one of the things that I say to all the kids I work with and teens is not to fall into the Marty Seligman's problematic P's. And those are making it personal, making it pervasive, and making it permanent. And I think that if you can not engage in those problematic P's, and instead, when you hit an obstacle, instead of saying, oh my God, what's wrong with me, but say that's the situation, or instead of saying, oh my God, this is going to be forever, just saying it's a moment in time. And instead of making it into a dinosaur problem, keeping it to being an ant problem, you're going to be able to cope with obstacles along the way. So that kind of mindset, I feel, is what we see with people who are gritty and ones that if we want to teach people who maybe aren't so gritty, the ones I would emphasize.
Nice, nice, nice. How about uh, behavior is also very
Mhm.
important, right? Especially
Exactly.
like, I mean, for all of us, right? But we really develop that, growing up. And later on, yeah, we can still change it, as we get older, but it's really nice if we can help the kids develop that gritty behavior. Just how can you, how do you connect these two? And what do you say for parents who want to help, their teens develop the right behavior and or possibly change it to go into the right directions?
So I think that that's really important because I always say to people, like, it's important to have the right mindset, but if you don't have the right behavior, it only will get you so far. You might want to get better at the piano, but if you don't go and practice the piano, it's not going to result in anything. So I think that what I again. In terms of the literature, Anders Ericsson has talked a lot about deliberate practice. It's a kind of practice which isn't that fun, by the way, but it's really honing in and visualizing the thing that you have a weakness in and really sticking with that weakness and practicing that until you make significant growth. So engaging in this thing called deliberate practice. The other thing that I think is really important is goal setting, and with the ultimate goal of keep repeating behavior till it makes it a habit. I know from your work, and I know you believe this as well, is that willpower is a limited resource. It's hard to use willpower all the time. However, if you make something into a habit, it actually you don't need to sort of bypassing a little bit this willpower dilemma, and it becomes easier. So, for example, I mentioned to you before that I'm doing this work in my school. I had the fifth graders come up with some grit goals. And one of them shared with me today that they wanted to actually improve their reading. They're going into middle school. They wanted their reading to get stronger. And what they did was every single day, when they came home, they had a snack and then they had 20 minutes that they did their reading. They made it into a habit. And by doing it in this way, they were much more successful than the kids who didn't sort of commit and make things into a habit. So again, habits for me are key.
It's interesting. As you were saying, it got me back to one of my thinking habits. So going back to childhood, and one of my habits was that I would always read before I go to sleep. So I would go to bed and always had a book. So the other thing I'm thinking is we have a kids that they really love something, and I want to give you an example. I forgot the gentleman's name just because I don't know all the names in the jazz, but I listened the other day, gentleman who's probably in his like late 90s now, the guy who in 1930s played in Harlem.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was 7 years old, he just always wanted saxophone, and I should know his name. And his mom bought him a sax, and he would go to his room and, as you said, deliberately practiced and practiced and practiced. Some of us parents will go, leave that sax, you got to get your homework, right? But his mom was so supportive, and now he's the legend. So how do we balance between, hey, there's something that they love to do, which we really need support. We need to support them. And sometimes we don't. Or we just don't know that that's the right thing to do. How do we balance that with, hey, there's work to do, there's a homework, and
Right.
for us adults too, right? There's a homework, there's work to do, and there's fun.
Right. So I think that in life, everything is about balance. And I think that, yes, we want people to be passionate and have a direction and be driven. But I also think with children and with teens, we also want them to have lots of things that they do and have that kind of balance in their life. So I think that again, there is that sort of, as a parent, there's always that balancing act. I think we want to be supportive. But we also don't want them to neglect things. And one of the things that I do in the book is have people look towards their strength to inform maybe an area they want to grow. So let's say, for example, that this individual you're talking about, or somebody else, let's say other teens who express this to me, or maybe, for example, they are academically very gritty, but socially they feel very uncomfortable with other people. But academically, it comes very easily to them. So one of the things I suggest in the book is to look towards your strengths. What are you doing in your strength that can maybe inform the area that you want to grow? So back to your individual with the saxophone, if he's very gritty with the saxophone and he needs to maybe improve a little bit with his academics, then maybe we can look and sort of look, what are you doing? And maybe his parents can also speak to that, to have the strength inform the area that you want to grow, because people like to work on their strengths and they like to think about their strengths. So that's kind of the mindset that I try to use in the book, and I do with the clients that I work with.
And that is such a right thing to do. I always talk about in my workshops, and it's all about utilizing your strength, seeing where you're really good at and how you can apply that in the area that you're not so good at. Right. So meaning you come to work and maybe you hate it. It's Monday morning but you are kind of social person, and you go and say hello to a couple of folks, have a coffee, and all of a sudden work is something else. It's not as bad any longer because you applied your strength, you made a few connections, which is, again, if you like socializing. So that's, thanks.
In one of the articles that Angela Duckworth had written, she speaks about this formula, and I think this formula is really important. She talks about that people pursue goals when they're important to them, when the costs are low, and when their likelihood of success is high. And I think if you think about it, if you think about anything you pursue, it kind of falls in those three categories. And I think people are especially sensitive to costs. All behavioral economics people will tell you people are very sensitive to the costs that are involved to that. Not the financial costs, but the costs they feel to if they're vulnerable or putting themselves out there. So those of us who work with teens, I think it's our job to help tweak that formula. If that thing that maybe that schoolwork, going back to that schoolwork, maybe that's not important to the team. Maybe the costs seem too high. Maybe their likelihood of success seems too far away. And if we can try to tweak the formula to make the formula work for the teen, I think they're going to be more successful in accomplishing that area and work on that goal.
Yeah, thanks. I think I would add to that even if the likelihood of succeeding is not that high, because often is kind of low, there's some of us, as long as we really, really have a passion and want to do this, we can achieve it. And we know so many people, right, that happen even when formula may not be the exact match. if you would
Right.
agree.
But I would add that I feel like, for example, I had somebody like in school who, like for example, let's say athletics aren't so easy for them. I think though it's the job of the teachers and the people working with that person to make those have small successes, make that
Mhm.
likelihood more likely. Because if that person feels no matter what they do, they're never going to be successful, then I
Mhm.
think then why would they try? I know I worked as a camp
Mhm.
psychologist for a long time, and there were kids who weren't so sporty. And I would encourage the counselor, why don't you play the game with them? Why don't you get the kids' input? Maybe or have them be a coach, but have some way that they can participate so that those small successes can bring larger successes.
I absolutely agree. And maybe I should make myself clear, especially with the teens, you have to go that way. And I'm thinking of, as we get older, some goals seem to be way out. But
Right.
if we're working on our grittiness our entire life, then, hey, I don't care if it's that high, I'm going to reach
Right.
it. Like when Kennedy announced we're going to reach the moon, the material for the rocket wasn't even invented. So that
Right.
was like the goal. That was like, wow, how are we going to go there? We don't even
Right.
have the material for it. How do you? So you also talked about overcoming the barriers. So
Mhm.
right, so connecting your value with the sense of purpose and you did talked about a little bit of mindfulness and gratitude and that's really a subject I love. I'm actually just doing a workshop on mindfulness and meditation and that is really really important. How do you do this with the teens?
Right. And I think that some people would be like, mindfulness, gratitude, where does that have to do with grit? But if you think about it, in order to be really gritty, you have to be focusing on the long term. You have to have that space to make a decision and like think about this decision and not be so reactive, to be more responsive. And if you think about what mindfulness does for individuals, it allows people to be more responsive, to have that space, to think about the long term and to be more present oriented, not to fall into those problematic P's. And so all the ways that we need people to think happen through mindfulness. So engaging in that actually sets people up so that they can have the brain that they need to do the hard work. And the same thing about gratitude. If you again are grateful for things, you're more optimistic, you're more positive, you're going to be less stressed. All those things are going to set you up to being able to deal with the challenges that you are necessarily going to face when you take on hard things. Because again, like you said before, grit is not about doing easy things. It's about doing hard things and hard things that you might have not even thought about. And because of that, you are going to have setbacks. And it's really important to help teens. And I think especially today, because a lot of teens are almost bubble wrapped. They have, parents who, because they're often anxious, they can helicopter, they can snowplow, they want to protect their kids, they want their kids to be happy, so that when they face setbacks, they don't always have the tools and the skills to know what to do with that. So again, in order for them to be successful, they need to think about setbacks as a stepping stone, as opposed to that means I need to stop.
That's a great point.
Yes.
I think, and maybe because all of us, every new generation thinks that, but I think that we are, being a helicopter parents and then just doing things for our kids. I think we're just depriving them of
Mhm.
their own happiness and success because the life comes and they're gonna go to college and they're gonna maybe they'll have a good time there and then they go to work and all of a sudden boom, they can't handle criticism, they can't handle
Right.
somebody tell them this is not good work. So I think we got to be careful and balance that as well, right?
Yes, and that's what I think that we're hearing a lot from people in the workplace, that millennials and young people, that it's very hard for them to handle feedback, and that they're very sensitive. And so that I think that, again, that goes back to your original question, that yes, I think academics and all those things are important. But I think especially in today's world, we must help kids grow their character. Again, most things, facts and information are going to be on people's computers or on their phones. They're not going to have that need to have that kind of just information in their heads. So, however, they are going to have to know how to work in a team, how to deal with challenges, how to kind of, show up and stay at work when they need to. So I think all those things are really important, especially in today's world.
But do we and you the teacher, and I'm not saying you and your school, but do we teach that enough?
Right.
Do we
Well, I think that that's what
generally?
IPEN and that movement is about. And as I said, I can only speak for my school,
Yeah.
but we are making a deliberate effort. And I think there are other schools that are making a deliberate effort to teach these skills because they are really important. And I think that that's, again, part of this whole positive education movement is to kind of grow those things because I think those things are essential.
Sure. And let's be honest, we can't just push everything on school. That's another thing
Right.
that's happening, right? We as a parents are really responsible for our kids.
Right.
So we have to do our part.
Right.
So,
And that also just speaks to one other thing that I think about with grit is that, you asked me about mindset and you asked me about behavior, and those are individual things people bring to the table. But for me, when I ask teens and I ask kids and I ask adults what helps them to be gritty, they always say that they're part of a team, that they don't do these things alone. And I think that, again, sometimes one of the criticisms of grit is that sometimes people feel like they tell kids who are poor or don't have opportunity, just be gritty. And that has never been my intention. And it's not also I don't want to speak for Angela, but that's not her intention as well. And what we know is that, first of all those things, poverty, inequality, all those things have a real effect on people's ability to be gritty. But what I think that's really important is that we also need to have parents, have communities, have schools sort of support kids and have it be that it's a grit team so that we have these mirror neurons that are sort of bouncing off of each other and everyone is sort of supporting each other and getting that support, because that's how I see grit is grown, is that when we have that support. I know for myself, when I was writing this book, there are times that it was really hard. I know that I'm sure that when you wrote your book, you felt that too. And for me, the most helpful thing was reaching out to other people who have done this before and for them to say, no, that's normal. This is what happens. This is
yeah.
what it's like. And for me, that let me go on. So I think that having that support is essential in terms of growing your grit.
Agreed. Having support and just generally, expanding your social network. I think if we can teach that as well, that's really key. Because if you look at today's environment in the world, really, how do we get to jobs? How do we succeed? It's, knowledge. It's assumed we have it. I mean, it's
Right.
not, it's not like, and the social connections and knowing the people who trust us and who we're going to help succeed is really what going to make us succeed in work.
Yes.
So now we're talking about all of these successes and being greedy and getting good at something and deliberate practice and helping them and then is it okay to quit?
Yes.
What if I want to quit? I'm tired of this.
Right. I think, listen,
Mom, I don't want to do this anymore.
Right. But I actually, as I said, I feel like it's important. I think that I don't think anyone's intention is to say never to quit. But I think what I would encourage people to do is not to quit on a bad day. So I'll have like often patients or kids who had a bad at bat, or they had a problem at basketball, or they went to ballet and they didn't feel like anyone talked to them. And that's not when the time I would be encouraging them to quit. I want them to, again, if they, after they tried and they've worked on something and it's not for them, and again, instead of being reactive, I want them to have a responsive type of way of being in this world and to be thoughtful about that decision and not just quitting because it makes them anxious or that it's too hard or that's a challenge, but to say eventually not everything is for everybody. This is really true. And I think sometimes that's one of the stresses of being a kid and a teen is that we almost have this expectation that kids should be good and teens should be good at everything. And it's just not how we're wired. However, I would encourage people not to quit on a bad day and to be thoughtful in the way that they quit and not to do it because it makes them anxious or they're worried.
I love a comment. I was listening yesterday, Seth Meyers, comedian, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how usually they'll have they'll finish the session. They still do it even Saturday Night Live. And at the end, they'll sit down and they'll talk about. And then he said, like, for a week or two, you would be depressed because you do something wrong. And now what he does with his team, they said, if something went wrong, let us sleep over and we'll talk about it tomorrow. And the chances are tomorrow, now they have work to work on the next day, so they don't even talk about it. So again, I'm not saying we shouldn't discuss when something goes bad, right? But just as you said, having a bad day doesn't mean that you want to quit or just focus on that, but rather keep moving.
And I think that it's important for us to share with teens and even with adults and with kids that we have the human being has this sort of tendency to focus on the negative. And again, I think from an evolutionary point of view, it made sense. All of a sudden a butterfly came into our cave, that wouldn't do anything. But if a bear came into our cave, we better take note of that. So I think that we almost have to kind of work against that natural tendency to focus on the negative and to notice more of that positive. And that goes back to gratefulness. The other day, as I said, I worked in a school and the kids were watching, they made this beautiful videotape. And when they were watching themselves on the videotape, they all of a sudden they noticed how they were looking or their voice. And I'm sure when I listen to this, I'm going to hear my voice and my grammar or something like that. And it's very easy just to focus on those small negative things. However, we need to make it our business to really kind of broaden our view and to focus on the positive. And again, so when we were watching these videos, we saw the kids, they literally were cringing. They were going like this under their desk. And we actually stopped the video and we said, listen, this is what we're talking about. This is what we're working on. And that your behavior is going to inform your mind. We want you to be open. We want you to embrace this. We want you to focus on the positive. And I have to say, by stopping the video and being really metacognitive about that process, the kids were able to do things differently. And so I think that that's my goal with this, is that if we can kind of teach kids about their thinking and their behavior, they can start to make some real changes in the way that they are.
Nice. So we talked about what's helpful. What is not helpful?
Okay, so I guess what's not helpful, especially with teens, is I would say kind of the bulldozing way that many parents and teachers can sort of work with teens. A lot of times teens engage in behaviors that trigger us, and then we can often become like a broken record. But I think what we know, again, from the research is that teens do best if we do things more in a stealthy, nudgy type of way. And so what do I mean by that? So when I work with teens, what I really like to do is have teens almost take leadership roles and teach other people about these skills as opposed to them just learning this. So one of the things that I'm doing in terms of my book is I'm having teens do everything. They made my book trailer. They made my videos. They're interviewing people. They help me with the chapter. And what I'm learning is that by doing that in this way, these teens are learning a tremendous amount. So I think that we need to be creative and try to get teens to sort of learn, teach other people to learn a lot of things themselves. So for example, just today in my school, or I've done this actually with older teens, I had them write like a letter to the next year's 5th grade class or the next year's 9th grade class to share everything that they learned. And again, they were doing it to help other people, but really it was a terrific summary and a good reflection for them about how to learn that material.
Nice.
So be nudgy and stealthy and not so direct.
Nice. Well said. So a few things. Where can we find your books? What do you think, who's the audience? I know the title probably says it all, but I think it's more than teens. So who's the audience and how can we use it?
Okay, so the book is available on all different places. It's at Amazon and Barnes & Noble and Target. If you go to my website, which is drbaruchfeldman.com, I have a page devoted to the book, and you can see all your options in terms of where to purchase or buy the book. In terms of who is probably buying the book, I would love it that teens are just going out and buying books. I'm not really so sure that that's really what happens. I think parents, teachers, counselors, people can use this in a classroom. They can use it. I think guidance counselors are finding it helpful, school psychologists. I think it's a type of thing where you can sort of work with somebody, work with a gritty teen, a teen who wants to grow their grit. And as I said, it's a very nice tool to work with somebody, or if a teen sort of is interested in this, they could, it could be something that you could give to them as well.
Nice, thanks. And again, there are a lot of exercises, so it's not just a book. There's a workbook inside. Then
Yeah.
I know you have online workbooks, so it is really, really, really great tool, not just reading material.
Right. So I guess the way I wrote it is kind of like the way I work. So it's like a little bit of an idea, and then the idea has some exercises to put it into practice. Because again, just like I was saying before, it's not enough just to kind of read something passively. We need people to actively engage and to do the work. And the way that the book is sort of outlined, it goes from picking a grit goal. And what's also sort of unique about the book is I have these domains. So I have, if a youngster or a teen wants to grow their academic grit, or their social grit, or their emotional grit, or extracurricular grit, or their wellness grit, they pick a domain and then they work on this grit goal throughout the workbook. So that's sort of the format of it. And again, as you said, it's a little bit of information and then a lot of exercises.
Nice, and that I think it's really, really important. So what is your final word? I think you really defined well the audience for your work. You kind of covered, and I believe that's kind of the audience that we expect to listen to this interview. Any final thoughts, final word for this audience, just generally either about grit or how they can help teens, regardless if they're psychologists, teachers, parents?
I mean, I think one thing I would just say is that I feel like when you really look at gritty individuals, they have a sense of purpose. And what that means is that they're doing something because it's important to them, but it's also important to other people. And I think that if you really think about it, I know this from my own self and this work, is that yes, it's important and I enjoy doing the work, but the real reason I'm doing this is really to help other people. And I think if we can help teens find their sense of purpose, we can have them do terrific things. As I said, when I've worked with teens in terms of doing this book, I've seen them do amazing things because they are doing this for themselves, but they're also hoping to inspire others. Part of what I'm doing with this work is make these, this is my grit story, and teens are sharing with other teens their stories. And the reason they want to do it is that, yes, it's good to talk about yourself, but I think more importantly, they want to inspire others. And that's my hope here, is just to inspire others. And I really want to thank you for this opportunity to let me kind of be able to inspire others. And that's really what this is all about.
Thank you, Dr. Feldman. This was really wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Truly enjoyed this discussion. I know you will be continue working together on some different projects.
And iPen 2018 will definitely both be there, hopefully.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.